Funky Politics.
Funky Politics Show.
Funky Politics.
Funky Politics.
Funky Politics.
Funky Politics. Powered by MLGW. Memphis Light Gas and Water.
Do not attempt to adjust your radio station. You're about to listen to the funkiest show in the entire nation. Funky Politics is on your station now, honey. The knowledge is free, but the crack costs money. So give me what you got. Don't expect no pork chop, because it's lit, my money's spent, and you're going to have to stop. Right now, you're listening to this funky show with this crew, so you won't be left behind. We're powered by MLG&W, electrified, gassed up, and filled to the brim of overflowing. I'm MD with my co-host, LaTanya from Stuttgart.
Hey, MD, how's it going?
It's going wonderful. It's going wonderful. Wonderful in my life.
You know, I'm excited about today.
Why? Because you just thought that was the right thing to say?
The right thing to say. It's springtime. You know, the seasons are changing. Mm-hmm. Days are getting longer, and I just have so much to look forward to.
Days are getting longer, and this show is getting stronger every day. But you know what? I had the opportunity a few days ago to check out 60 Minutes, a show I don't watch as much as I used to, because all of the heroes are gone. All the great guys you used to listen to. But they still have good journalists, very good journalists. I just don't listen to it. But I saw my Secretary of Education on there in a major meltdown of sorts.
Come on through, Leslie Stahl.
Talking about policies that she wanted to pass in light. And I mean, if the issues weren't so serious, it would be absolutely hilarious. But the issues are very serious.
And they weren't trick questions.
No.
They weren't fake news. It wasn't gotcha.
Maybe to her.
It was just straightforward things that if you have a cabinet level position,
right,
you should be able to speak on.
Like, what is your name?
And what's happening in your state. So I can understand not knowing the details of what's happening in every community, but you should at least be able to speak on what's happening in your backyard, right?
Right. But then also, I mean, one of the biggest things we're talking about, the gun control policy in schools. You have to be able to have an articulable basis for coming forward with any policy, particularly something as radical as arming teachers. Because what a lot of people don't understand, I've been going back and forth on this issue, is that people say, well, arm the teachers, arm the teachers. If you're going to carry a firearm in the name of a job, any job for government, you are going to have to pass a psychological exam. The psychological exam is basically a simulation of how a person would handle situations and whether or not they would utilize the firearm in situations to resolve the issue.
So, but I would even take it back to the school choice thing, right?
Right.
So if you're going to pull money from public schools,
from a public school,
you have to have a good articulated reason for the outcomes of why this is a better alternative.
Right.
Right? Yeah. And I didn't hear that in that argument.
We didn't hear anything on gun policy. We didn't hear anything on pulling money from schools. And then she talked about visiting, remember, about visiting a school. What was the term? It wasn't intentional that she didn't go to.
She hadn't purposely. You know, she hadn't visited an underperforming school purposely. Right. Yeah, it was kind of scary.
Well, every time she shows up at a school, all of a sudden becomes underperforming. But these are the things and the times that we are in right now, you know, when it comes down to the cabinet that we have, and we wish we didn't have to just pile on all the time. But this stuff is real, y'all. It's real.
And it's not just affecting our kids today.
Yeah. So,
because I keep talking about, I have a 17-year-old who will vote in this election, right? But I'm thinking about this in terms of the implications for my grandchildren.
Absolutely.
And so this is a long game.
Yeah, it's the long game, and that's why, you know, we've been talking about the long game in a lot of instances. It's been 50 years since Martin Luther King was assassinated, and it seems like sort of the narrative is, where do we go from here? But that's not just a narrative for African Americans. That's a narrative for everyone.
And let's make sure we understand where are we today.
Where are we today? And
so that we understand, put a stake in that, so that we talk about where do we go from here.
Well, I'm going to tell you where we are today. Today we are talking to Wendi Thomas,
my
founder of MLK 50, Justice Through Journalism. And it's it's more than just a movement. It's a mission. And she's going to talk to us about a lot of instances, but particularly Martin Luther King's stance on some issues as they relate to women and the protesting that's going on today. And also whether or not the Martin Luther King of today will be like the Martin Luther King that was in the Aaron McGruder production, The Boondocks, that was produced not too long ago. We're also going to talk to Mendel Grinter and Terry Freeman as they showcase their publication on MLK and education. All of that right here. It's a whole lot. And we're going to pick up those pieces and keep them going right here on Funky Politics, powered by the KUDZUKIAN Network.
Funky Politics.
Plus one lip sync champion, Latasha Peoples.
Staring in the mirror, gonna change my ways. I wanna make Memphis a better place. I see a neighbor in need, but what can be done? Instead of buying shoes or a pretty dress with just $1 a month, you can help the rest. It starts with you. Plus one.
You know, giving back through Plus One will make a difference for families in crisis.
It starts with you. Plus one. Grandma's message couldn't have been any clearer. If you want to change Memphis, look in the mirror. It starts with you. Plus one.
I remember when we got help from Plus One.
And now we're helping others.
Hey, Memphis, you can make a change.
You too can make a difference.
This is Corey Strong, straight out of Memphis 10. You listen to Funky Politics, powered by the KUDZUKIAN Network.
He told them the truth.
Will you ignorant please shut the hell up?
He just said what I think he said.
Is this it? This is what I got all those weapons for? I had a dream once. It was a dream that little black boys and little black girls would drink from the river of prosperity, freed from the thirst of oppression. But lo and behold, some 4 decades later, what have I found but a bunch of trifling, shiftless, good-for-nothing. And I know some of you don't want to hear me say that word. It's the ugliest word in the English language, but that's what I see now. And you don't want to be a because are living contradictions. Are full of unfulfilled ambitions. Wax and wane. Love to complain. Love to hear themselves talk but hate to explain. Love being another man's judge and jury. Procrastinate until it's time to worry. Love to be late. Hate to hurry. Black entertainment television.
Funky Politics is the hour. MLGW provides the power. MD and LT provide the lesson that relieves your stress. And Wendi C. Thomas is our lovely guest. Right here on Funky Politics. This is what happens when the uninhibited version of Funky Politics takes place.
Okay.
Yeah, we just you and I taking it away with our special guest, the brain trust, the purveyor, the surveyor, the founder, and everything else of MLK 50, Justice Through Journalism, the funk-nominal woman. And we coined that phrase right here, if you remember.
Y'all did.
Funk-nominal woman, Wendi C. Thomas. How you doing today?
I'm wonderful. I'm with y'all, so I can't be anything but great.
Well, we provide you some level of comfort. We try anyway.
Yes.
We try anyway. Aaron Magruder, the Boondocks. You all heard it.
That was hilarious. I mean, even though it's old, it really did sound good, you know.
I've learned to memorize every line. Because in a lot of ways it's true, but now we have the MLK expert, the person that knows more. But her last name should be King probably after this. But listening to that now, and had you? I'm sure you heard it before.
Yeah, I definitely heard it. Definitely heard it before.
Listening to it now in the context of where we're going, because you know this time is dawning now, the MLK 50 date and everything else, and everyone's asking where do we go from here and all of that. Are those, I guess, what happened in the Boondocks scene, is that an accurate depiction of where we are now in some degree, or was that just sort of a salacious and comedic excerpt of something?
Yeah, so I think when I saw this like the first time, however many years it came out,
right,
it was hilarious, right? It was hilarious. But now, having thought a lot more about, you know, why King was in Memphis, what he was about, I'm feeling some kind of way about that sketch. I got to be honest. I don't know that if King were alive, he'd be practicing respectability politics. You know what I mean? Trying to clown folks.
Respectability?
Yeah. I don't think he'd be trying to clown people for how they're dressing or that they're getting their buck jump on.
But Wendy, you got to admit, though, that MLK holidays now are really co-opted. So it's people who are deciding that they're going to have mattress sales and they're going to have these day parties and things like that. And we don't talk about service and we don't talk about the policies.
Right. So we definitely don't talk about the policies the way we should, but I don't think it has to be either or. I think we can have our parties and our mattress sales and still, focus on like poverty and the public policies that could help alleviate that. I think that's...
you're listening to Funky Politics, powered by the KUDZUKIAN Network, and that's one of the things that I noticed about all the other holidays. Everybody gets a chance to go off and barbecue and party and enjoy just a time of reflection and decompression. But it seems like in Martin Luther King's holidays, we have to be working and going to programs and doing all these other things. It's like you're working even during the holiday.
Right. But maybe if we were doing that work all throughout the year, we could take that day, right, and let it be a day of reflection. And I don't think King was against black joy, you know what I mean?
Right.
Or
Absolutely.
black celebration.
I tend to believe that the history will say that he had his own share of fun quite a bit. He was a jokester, a comedian.
Yes.
He liked to hang out and do stuff. I mean,
Absolutely.
He's acquainted with all the things that we've been acquainted with. So why not?
Right. I agree.
But I would say, though, in the Boondocks depiction, though, there's this whole notion that, I think what it was that Martin Luther King was actually in a coma. Mm-hmm. And the people in the I guess the Boondock world had really disintegrated the whole notion of equality, of economic achievement, of any kind of achievement, and just resorted to for lack of a better phrase, a ghetto stance. And 50 years later, Martin Luther King was assassinated. We're almost on that 50-year anniversary. Are we finding ourselves as African Americans living in that world? I know we've had some achievement, but are we finding ourselves, too many of us, living in that world that Martin Luther King was sort of debasing when he came back? Or have we really achieved at the level that we should have in the last 50 years?
Have the disparities closed in the way that would make King proud? No, absolutely not. Do black people bear the total responsibility for that? No, I don't think so. And some of the data that came out, measuring how far Memphis has come since '68, showed that specifically on education levels, high school graduation rates, college graduation rates, black people have been making the most of the opportunities that are available. Like those rates are way up from '68, but the income stuff hasn't changed, and so you have to ask yourself, okay, if we're getting the education like they say you're supposed to get better jobs, how come that's not translating into more money in people's pockets? And that's where I think the systemic structural racism and stuff comes into play.
Well, and education is one thing, but we also talk about the entrepreneurial piece of this, right?
Right.
And so economic justice and businesses and opportunities and contracts and stuff like that. And I guess my question would become, do people really know what the policies were that he stood up on? Has that message been lost in the whole, I have a dream? What is the dream? Do people understand what the dream is?
Right. So I think when people talk about the dream, they're thinking about, we want little black boys and little white boys to be walking hand in hand.
Aspect of
the social aspect of it. But King called for a radical redistribution of political and economic power. Radical redistribution. That sounds like reparations.
Say that slowly. So
radical redistribution of political and economic power. Mm-hmm. Radical redistribution.
And what did that mean? The radical redistribution.
It sounds like reparations to me. King called for a guaranteed income, basic income, or guaranteed jobs program. That's what he called for. And you don't see anything like that being promoted, and you certainly won't see it under the current presidential administration.
But you think locally, and there's all these grants out here, people who are working on workforce development and trying to help people to qualify for these jobs and these education credentials and things like that as a pathway to help people get there. How effective do you think those things are?
So I think that gets tricky, right? Because if you do too well in workforce development, that kind of training, you done worked yourself out of a job, right? And so I think there's this perverse incentive a lot of times with these nonprofits that, purport to help address poverty, where they can't do too good of a job because then they won't have a job, right? And so
I've heard that poverty is actually the second largest industry in Memphis behind distribution.
Yeah, I can see how, I don't know what the exact numbers are, but yeah, there's a lot of money to be made around poverty and a lot of jobs that are created supposedly trying to manage that or reduce that, or what have you.
And you're listening to Funky Politics, powered once again by the KUDZUKIAN Network. Our guest today is the funky Wendi C. Thomas, the founder of MLK 50, Justice Through Journalism, the project that you all really need to partake in and really find out about King's mission and understand what he was really fighting for in all people, because economic equity and equality is something that he really never got a chance to fully flesh out. That's the piece that we don't really know about, because his life was cut short by an assassin's bullet during that time. But in addition to what you were talking about before, he was also trying to go into the private sector,
right,
and encourage, force or leverage some kind of way where the private sector would be more prominent in hiring African Americans and making them a part of jobs. And that came in the 70s to some degree with integration, but not in a large degree. But how was he trying to do that before he was assassinated?
Right. So, if you listen to King's last speech, the mountaintop speech, he talks about we need to go in and put pressure on white businesses that don't hire black workers in the proportion of their share of the community. So if you have a city that's 60% black, then his logic would go that 60% of companies in that city should also be black. And if they're not, that's indicative of some kind of discrimination or structural issues in that organization. So if you were to go to any of the top companies here in Memphis and look at their leadership team, you wouldn't see that team being 60% black. Now, if you go out in the stock rooms or in the kitchen, you know what I'm saying? Like, you might see it there, but King didn't want to see it just in the menial areas.
But those aren't decision makers.
Right.
And those aren't people that have the ability to hire people and do
and
other
fire,
things,
right? Or decide where their contract money is going to be spent. So again, getting back to your, point about black entrepreneurs, King called for that too. He said folks need to take their money out of white banks and put it into Tri-State Bank. And clearly that, it's a black-owned bank, in Memphis, the only one. And clearly that has not happened here in the city or across the country, because black banks are struggling largely.
When I'd like to take a step back, because we jumped right into this conversation about everything that's happening in the future. Tell us a little bit about your work, about MLK 50 and that whole project that you've led up for the last 18 months, I guess.
Yeah. So MLK50.com, it's a year-long nonprofit reporting project focused on economic justice in Memphis. So we wanted to, my team of reporters, editors, photographers, we wanted to really bear witness in this moment to the reality of what King was talking about in '68 and how that applies today in Memphis, and amplify these parts of his message that get overlooked: the economic justice, the black entrepreneurship, those sort of things. So we've got original content on our site where we're active on social media, making a bit of a ruckus, How
has the city embraced that, the reality of what you're reporting?
Yeah, so I think the city is in a really tough spot, right? Because I can understand why they want to present this image to the world that's positive, right? They want to look like they've moved past all of this stuff in '68, but the data doesn't support that, right? So we cannot celebrate in this moment because too many kids are still living in poverty. And the median income for black households is still half of what it is for white households here in Memphis. And that's been true since 1950. Okay, so we have a lot of work to do, and I'm sure the city wishes more of that work had already been done so they could hey, we've arrived, but we can't do it.
And you're listening to Funky Politics, powered by the KUDZUKIAN Network. Well, that sounds sort of like when what Angela Rye was talking about when she came and addressed a group a few weeks ago as part of the festivities, as part of the observations that were being made during this time. And that drew a lot of ire of the city government and some other people. I don't know if I would have approached it differently, but what were your thoughts? As someone who's been doing the research, what are your thoughts about what she had to say as far as where the city had come?
Right. So, Angela, CNN commentator, political analyst, had sat down with some, community activists before she got up there on stage. And so she'd been filled in on what was going on. She had the data, she had the facts, she had the receipts. And I think the city was hoping that they were going to be able to borrow some of her cred, kind of as this work woke, commentator. They had that kind of rub off on them, and she got up there and read their mail, and I could understand why they were embarrassed. If it were me and I invited somebody in my house and they told me about myself, I would be embarrassed too. But the thing to do is
but
to fix your stuff.
But she wasn't saying anything that people didn't already know.
And she wasn't saying anything that local people hadn't already been saying to city government.
Right.
You know what I mean? They just having it on this larger scale, and having her with all her social media presence.
Right.
It embarrassed her.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I was, and to me, from my standpoint, I was a little embarrassed, but not for the reasons the city was embarrassed. I was embarrassed because I'm thinking, and I've said this before on the show, why does it take people to come from outside to tell us what we need to know to move our city forward on all fronts?
But it's not even just the people from the outside. So you think about what's happening here with the statues, right? And that was an internal, that was something that happened internal about take them down 901 and things like that. Mm-hmm. And in the context of all of this, how important do you think is that, removing the statues and the symbolism and moving us forward towards a progressive post 50 years of MLK?
So I think, I can understand why a lot of people have criticism about the focus on removing the statues. They could say this ain't putting no money in anybody's pockets. This isn't creating any jobs. But I do think that those symbols are important. And I know when I had to drive past that, Nathan Bedford Forrest monument, it was like a big middle finger. Like, you don't matter to this city. This is what we're protecting. This is what deserves protecting. Right. And so I think it's important to take it down. I think it signals a new day, and maybe lets the people who romanticize Forrest kind of put them on notice that we're not going to do this anymore, So I think it's important in that way, but I think it's just a piece of a whole. And if you even listen to the Take 'Em Down 901 activists, they were always saying this is a step on the way to liberation. This is not the end. This is the beginning.
Right. And it's more of but you have to start emotionally and psychologically. Mm-hmm. And, a lot of times we're driven and we react to things subliminally by the images that are around us.
Or we don't know our history, right? So, like, I'm not from Memphis, and so it to me, it brings it back to like Forest City. So I'm from Arkansas, right? And I've known this about Forest City my entire life and didn't know that it was named after Nathan Bedford Forrest. So it's one of those things about knowing your history and how do you move forward from those types of monuments to the next phase. So when you think about the next phase, what's next with, as we get past April 4th and the 50-year anniversary, what's next for this movement?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. One thing I want to add about the monuments is that the April 4th kind of deadline being the 50th anniversary of King's death, that gave us what King would call the fierce urgency of now to get it down, right? So it was an artificial deadline. But if you didn't have that, I think the monuments would still be up, right? Because again, the city doesn't want to be embarrassed. They want to look like they've made progress and change. As for what's next, I think that's an excellent question, and I do worry about what happens when the spotlight goes away. You know what I mean? And I haven't seen, the kind of public sector or private sector policy plans that would lead me to suggest that in another 50 years anything will be any different, right? So,
well, who's out there that's driving that? Because a lot of things are show, and they are. They're presentations, and programs, things to commemorate and build the psyche. But you would think that at a time where we're realizing that there's still so much that we have to do, there would be some policy, there would be some law, there would be some legislation out there.
Not just cleaning up, right?
Well, I mean,
and mentorship and all some of those things that we talk about.
Some procedures that actually focus on not just the growth of the city of Memphis, but the growth of Black communities everywhere. Who's actually coming behind, or is there someone in the midst of this that's coming behind with that type of mentality?
So I think the closest you'll get is probably the Fight for 15 movement, with some of the recommendations around wages, right, and unionizing, which is really tough in the South because a lot of the laws make that hard to do.
Right.
I think with the Black Lives Matter movement, and specifically some of the pushes they're making around ending the money bail system, I think you'll see those kind of things. But where are, the politicians on the left and the right who are going to be putting these MLK quotes, on their Twitter feed on April 4th? What kind of policies are they supporting? And
absolutely.
There's this complete hypocrisy, again, on the left and the right, because we're not pushing for those more progressive policies.
So it sounds like that's what we have to do. In the midst of it all, the movement's going to still come from the citizens.
Yes.
And that's why, and it's going to be real, it's going to be right, and it's going to be funky, just like Funky Politics. And we're going to be back with the phenomenal woman, Wendi Thomas, as we discuss MLK 50. Justice through journalism.
Riffin' on Jazz.
This next gentleman we're talking about has an unforgettable voice.
My sugar is so refined.
Jazz was the happiest. Al Calloway went to my school.
Oh, really?
Yes, he's not an alum because he didn't graduate. He had some gigs to do.
Riffin' on Jazz on the KUDZUKIAN Network. Funky Politics.
It's funky, it's real, it's right, it's funky, it's real, and it's real, right, and funky. Funky Politics, powered by the KUDZUKIAN Network. MD and LT, your host for today. I've been told that I have to say, I have to mention Latanya very prominently. LT, that's right? Latanya
Robinson.
From
Stuttgart.
And you were telling me that Stuttgart's in the news, right?
Stuttgart made the Memphis news twice this week. I'm so proud.
Because a tree fell on some kids?
Teenagers.
And the guy picked the tree up?
He saved them. The swift thinking.
The swift thinking
of a young
man. On top of some people. I think I need to get the tree off the people.
The swift thinking of a young man. But it made the Memphis news. I was sitting here like, wow. Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
We're
part of the Mid-South and the Delta.
To that young country strong man that saved the whole community.
He did.
If you lost 3 kids, you would have been down to
4.
That's half the population. He's your savior. Wendi Thomas, how are you doing?
I'm wonderful.
Always a pleasure to have you here.
Ditto.
Yeah.
Ditto.
I'm glad you like being here. You bring us so much. Really.
Yeah.
You do. And we're talking right now about MLK 50, Justice Through Journalism, which is your project. Right?
It is.
And so that makes you the sort of in-house expert on all things King, right?
In this room today, yes.
All things Dr. Martin Luther King. Because I don't like to call him MLK because we never hung out. So I like to call him just Dr. King.
Dr. King.
But speaking of Dr. King, over the past couple of years, women have been capitalizing our news cycle from an activist perspective and also from a voting perspective, because we understand that with the election in Alabama, Roy Moore, and the other elections, the primaries and general elections in Virginia and everything else, women were prominent in determining outcomes.
Right.
So we're seeing right now that this has been a very, very I would say illustrious time for women and their activism in our society. But in Martin Luther King's society from that time frame, were things different, or were they just suppressed, or what was his position as related to women and activism?
So I think King was very much a product of his time, right? And we're talking about a very patriarchal, traditional society. Right. You didn't have women in the pulpit, back then. And you have to remember, King was a Baptist preacher. And so a lot of these leaders in the movement were also preachers. So you didn't have a lot of women involved. One of the names I think that we don't remember in this movement, particularly in King's last years of his life, was Marion Wright Edelman, just Marion Wright then, right? And she is the one who actually originated the idea for the Poor People's Campaign, which is what King was planning, in the last years of his life. And that name just kind of gets glossed over. So I think it's...
but she's had several achievements since then.
Oh, absolutely.
She's over UNICEF and been an advisor to the Clinton administration.
Children's Defense Fund.
Sure.
And I think at the local level, there were always women who were involved, who were like the foot soldiers, right? The people who were there to do the organizing, the people who were there to do the coordination, because at the end of the day, there's some certain things that women are good at, right? So we had to make sure that...
What are those things?
I'm just going to be realistic. Making sure that people had a place to eat, a place to stay, a place to eat, and those type of things. So
event planning.
Well, yes. So you don't want to discount people like Amelia Boynton Robinson and some of those people who were really critical. Even Rosa Parks, they were critical to the work that he did during those days.
And not to say that women are just good at them, it's just that men are terrible at those.
But again, talking about that patriarchal society, right? So as an acceptance, we're okay with men being the leaders, right, out front and things like that, and women being behind the scenes doing the work that had to get done.
But in terms of things like economic equality, social equality, I would say women's health issues and rights as it relates to abortion, all the things that are on the table now and have been on the table since then. Did Dr. King ever really take a stance on those issues as related to black women?
So there's an argument that can be made that Dr. King was pro-choice, right? If you think of pro-choice in terms of a verb and not necessarily a noun. There's one abortion doctor in Mississippi, Willie Parker. Okay. He points out that Dr. King got the Margaret Sanger Award by Planned Parenthood. Margaret Sanger was a founder of Planned Parenthood. Because King recognized that family planning was central to having any kind of economic stability. The ability to plan the size of your family, access to birth control. So King knew this. He got this award. He accepted this award, knowing what Planned Parenthood was about. And so I think that in that respect, King definitely respected the autonomy of women. His wife was critical to his success, was very supportive. Even after he passed, kind of took that mantle and ran with it. But we're talking about the 50s and 60s, but
she was she was an opera singer, I think.
She was very educated,
right?
Very educated.
So couldn't you make the argument then that he had sort of a progressive view as related to women because of who he chose to marry and her role in his plight?
So I would take it a different direction. I would say behind every great man, there's a good woman. And so we go back to a lot of the historical figures in history. So you think about Frederick Douglass and nobody talks about Anna. You think about Dred Scott and nobody talks about his wife, Harriet. So again, Martin Luther King and Coretta. And again, Barack and Michelle. Barack couldn't be Barack without Michelle being supportive of him,
But do we talk about
right?
Anna because we don't talk about Anna? Or do we talk about Anna because Anna was his wife? I mean,
now, Anna did work too. So these women put in work, right? They were part of the movement. It's no different than what happens in my house. James is able to be successful because he has LaTanya beside him, supporting him, right?
Sure.
And to help him do those things. And the same thing I would imagine in your house, you can do those things because Mrs. Ward is there, right?
Right.
And so I would put that in the same token in those times. But during those times, women weren't in those positions and weren't accepted, particularly black women. Let's just be honest. A black woman stepping out, look, we're still sitting here waiting on Harriet Tubman to get her $20 bill.
50.
20.
I thought it was 20.
She's on women on 20s.
Oh, I thought it was 50.
No, she's on 20s. The Canadians have put their woman on the cover, but we still haven't put Harriet, who had a birthday last.
I thought it was. So we're going to move Alexander Hamilton.
We're moving Alexander Hamilton.
Not Alexander, excuse me, Andrew Jackson. Excuse me. Andrew Jackson.
Off the 20.
Off the 20.
For Harriet. But I
thought the Tubmans were going to be 50s.
No, the Tubmans are going to be 20s, baby. We're going to make it rain with 20s.
Well, we're going to make it rain.
Make it rain with $1 bills.
I mean, I think that'd be kind of you're making it rain with.
There's a lot of different places. We didn't say where it was going. Hey, I didn't say it was where it was going. I'm just saying it's going to happen. Because look, if you think about what you carry in your wallet, it's a 20. That's the prize.
I carry a card, so mine is totally different. You're listening to Funky Politics, powered by the KUDZUKIAN Network. Our special guest, Wendi Thomas of LK50, Journey Through Justice. But back to this stuff. I mean, it's kind of weird. You're gonna be making it rain with Harriet Tubman.
It feels a little inappropriate.
Doesn't it? You're making it rain with Harriet Tubman.
Okay, but look. So instead of talking about all about the Benjamins, we're still going to be talking about all about the Tubmans.
Harriets?
No, it's the Tubmans, baby. All about the Tubmans. This is Women's History Month. Let's play. Let's celebrate our sister.
Oh yeah, now Women's History.
It's Women's History Month. Let's celebrate our sister and talk about all about the Tubmans.
So can we agree though that Martin Luther King, there were some burgeonings of progressive thought as related to African American women as part of the movement?
I think you could make that argument. But again, he's a part of his time.
They made him Republican and everything else. So why not? Why can't we make him?
He's not Republican the way we think of Republicans
well,
now.
The Republicans have co-opted him for sure for everything that they do.
That's a lie.
Mike Pence said he believed in the Holy Bible, and his two favorite people were Martin Luther King and somebody else, Donald Trump, I think. But they all have embraced him as one of them. So we can embrace him as someone who was progressive in his thoughts about women and gender equality and economic equality for women, right? Can we agree?
I think economic equality, of course, is going to incorporate women.
Right.
And today particularly, you see a lot of job growth concentrated in low-wage industries, and it's women that are working a lot of those jobs. So you're talking about like home health care aides, particularly teachers' aides, fast food workers. Those are majority women. And majority women of color.
Yeah. So we're going to make him progressive. We're going to it'll be a little Hope Hicks white lie. It won't be a real. But anyway, moving along though, because because this is the important part of it, because with all these protests, with all this activism that's been taking place, one thing that we're starting to see is that African American women are starting to demand that there be more of a focus on the causes that are clear and dear and specific to African American women if they're going to continue on with this process of protesting. And so that's why I was sort of bringing it up, because even though that's not necessarily an MLK, that's not an MLK thing, it still is something that is sort of born out of the legacy of Martin Luther King. So as we go forward now, and you have so many women that are out here that are activists, African American women now, how are they going to be able to withstand what seems to be the dilution of their message? And I know you've been studying Martin Luther King, but you were doing this, you were talking about equality long before you started talking about Martin Luther King. So what are your views on that?
Well, I think that, if you look at like the Women's March, first one, black women are like, I'm not so sure, but we're going to go along. Second one, they're like, this is going to be more intersectional before we're going to lend our support to that. And I think that's, a reflection of black women finding their voices and feeling empowered to use those voices and saying, hey, if we're going to be able to like bring elections home for y'all in Alabama, here's what you're not going to do. You're not going to ignore us in other points when we're trying to bring our issues to the fore. And I think that's a good thing. You can look at the Black Lives Matter movement. That was started by three sisters, Right. You look at the New Poor People's Campaign. Right. William Barber is kind of the head of it, but he's got a co-founder, and that's Liz Theo Harris. So there's women.
The Me Too movement.
Same thing. And I think that's, again, people finding their power, women finding their power, and upending stuff. I think that's powerful.
And I think the other part of this is that we have to run to protect our own interests.
When you say you're talking about black women.
I'm talking about black women.
Or women in general.
Women in general, but black women specifically, because I am one, right? So when I look, that's the one thing I've never had to define in my life. I walk into a room and everybody knows who I am, right? And what I am.
Because they can see. LaTanya.
Absolutely. and my name gives it away, that LaTanya. It gives it away, right? Everybody knows everybody know I'm black, okay?
Yeah, okay.
But what I like about it and what I see is that there's so many people who are running for office right now. So at the local level, at the regional level, and at the state level and things like that, because if we don't advocate for ourselves, who does? There's been that long-standing thing out there that the most underrepresented woman out there, person in the world right now is a black woman. And that's been the case for a while. So we have to get out there and advocate for ourselves, for policy changes, for positioning, whether it's in education, whether it's in economics, whether it's in community involvement. We have to be our own advocates.
When you're listening to Funky Politics, powered by the KUDZUKIAN Network. But now, is that really the case? Because, and this is some more, we talk about the legacy of Martin Luther King. You have V. Lyles, you have Keisha Lance Bottoms, you have, and I forget the mayor-elect in New Orleans. Black women are coming in and taking over the South, the formerly segregated South. Charlotte, North Carolina has a black woman mayor. Atlanta, Georgia has a black woman
because
mayor.
If we don't have someone...
New Orleans, Louisiana has a black woman
absolutely,
mayor.
We have to be at the table and at the head in order for our issues to come to the forefront.
And is this what King was talking about? Would he be proud at seeing this? I mean, what was he saying was bigger than just elected office? It's about being able to control your own destiny in the private sector.
Well, I think he would be proud of these sisters in elected office, but he would still... It's not an either or, right? It would be a both and. Right. So we need us to be in elected office. We need to be in the C-suites. We need to own our own businesses. All of that combined, I think, gets us closer to black liberation.
Sure. And I mean, the same thing, you have younger African-American males now in the South. The mayor of Birmingham. Jackson, Chokwe Lumumba, and Richmond, Virginia. And you can go on and on and on. So now looking at that, and just that sort of that dynamic in the Martin Luther King 50 dynamic. Are we doing what he would have seen? Is this what he would have seen or would have envisioned for 2018, back when he was talking about going to the mountaintop and having a dream and everything? Is this what he would have envisioned in that regard?
Yeah, that's. So I think he would, again, he'd be proud of having black folks in office, but not proud of them if they were just going to perpetuate the status quo. They would need to get in there and be disruptive. How could they change policies to benefit people of color? And if they're just going to get in there and shuck and jive and grin in folks' face, he wouldn't be proud of that. He'd be like, get rid of them too, I think.
Do you think it was people of color, or is it just it's equality across the board. So, and that's part of my struggle, trying to understand, because we talk about people of color, then we talk about the poor people's movement, right? So is it the have and the have-nots, or is it specifically people of color?
So I think there's such an overlap between race and class when you think about inequality that you can't really separate those.
Mm-hmm.
So not all black people are poor, of course, but black people are disproportionately poor. And so you can't extricate those. You have to think about them together. And often public policy that will help the poor people automatically is going to benefit black people.
All tides rise, right?
No, I don't think all. No. I don't think that.
Rising tide lifts all boats. I think not all of them. No. Because if your boat's got a hole in it, you're not going to get lifted.
Yeah,
and
probably
I think
just
that's
gonna
the
sink
issue.
and drown.
Yeah, you're going to just sink that water. You're going to take on water much faster. And I think that's what's happening a lot of times with a lot of policies.
Yeah.
That's why I think we need to really have some people involved that can legislate. And I think for the longest we've been, and I'm saying this in the political world for African Americans, not just in one place but everywhere, we have been a little bereft of that because we don't have people that are statesmen and that are passing policy. We've got a lot of people that are populist. Mm-hmm. They're the guy that you like or the woman that you like that has the catchy phrases and everything else. Well, we know if you want catchy phrases and someone that can really tell you what you need to know,
keep up alive.
You can listen to Funky Politics. But if you want, and we'll go a whole lot deeper because we have people like Wendi Thomas on our show. But what you're going to have, but what you really need is someone that can look into the policy. Because when you start legislating, you're talking about not just today, but tomorrow and the next day and the next day for your children and generations to come. And I think that's what we're really lacking and what we're on the political front. And I think it affects us on the business front as well. Would you not say that?
Yeah, I would agree. But I want to push back a little bit about not having that kind of leadership because we've got some progressive district attorneys that have come in some cities around the country. I'm thinking about Philadelphia as an example. And they're saying, you know what, we're not going to prosecute low-level marijuana offenses. We're just not going to do that anymore. Right. And that's like groundbreaking. That's the kind of public policy stuff. We're not going to try to trap, black folks in the criminal justice system over a loose joint. We're not going to do that. And how can we get more elected officials like that in office? Right. DA is a real powerful role.
Extremely. And DA is to focus on recidivism and trying to eliminate that, and as well as trying to take offenses that people used to spend, years in jail for, and a lot of government money was wasted in the process, actually spending time trying to rehabilitate people. But that's what we're needing to see, and I think that's what Martin Luther King would want to see. He would want to see it, and he would want it to be real, right, and funky. So, since that's the way he wanted to be, that's the way we're going to give it to him and continue to give it to him right here on Funky Politics, powered by the KUDZUKIAN Network.
Funky Politics.
The off-year electorate, the midterm electorates, are older, less diverse, more conservative. You have two electorates fighting for the future of this country. And what I'd say to your viewers and people listening in is, you know what? You got to stop that older, less diverse electorate from funking around with your future.
Funking up your airwaves and jamming the good information in your ear. Once again, it's Funky Politics.
Funky Politics. Funky Politics.
A man once captured a beautiful bird in a sacred olive tree. The man was smitten by its beauty and offered to give this bird anything. The bird said, "Just set me free. Set me free without condition or controlled inhibition. Let me fly high. Don't create my ceiling. Don't decorate my sky. I need to have my own way, see my own way, be my own way, do my own thing the way I want to do it." Martin Luther King once said he wasn't interested in burn, baby, burn. But he was more interested in learn, baby, learn, and earn, baby, earn. So we got to take the ceiling away so that we can soar, particularly so that our women can soar as high as they can. You know what I'm talking about?
I think that's such a great prelude to everything that's happening. So in the midst of MLK and equal opportunity, we have the history-making weekend that had Black Panther and A Wrinkle in Time as the number 1 and the number 2 box office.
Right after Get Out winning,
Yeah, but I'm just saying, but Ryan paved the way, and Ava got $100 million budget to do that film, and their visuals may not be what the world expected, but we removed all their barriers, and allowed them to do it, and so they're flying, and they're performing, and the world is noticing.
And it was great to have Terry Freeman, Mendel Grinter, and Wendi Thomas on the show today talking about not just what Martin Luther King believed in, but what he would have believed in were he still here and been proud of seeing. Because we talk so much all the time about things that need to be improved. But instead of talking about things that are good, and they need to be improved as well, but they're already functioning at a very high level.
Where we are today, let's celebrate where we are.
And all that needs to happen, really, is that if you take off the chains, if you take the glass ceiling away, and if you allow all people to soar as high as they can, from an economic level, from an arts and creative level, from a social level, from any level, you will get the best and the brightest of everything that a person has to offer. That's what makes this world real. That's what makes this world right. And that's what makes this world
funky.
Sure enough funky. So until next time, you've got MD, LT. Speaking for DC, I think we took a break, but he'll be back shortly. We'll be gone by then, but he'll be back. And we implore you, we mandate you to always listen to Funky Politics. And once again, keep it real, keep it right, and keep it what again, LT?
Funky.
Right here on Funky Politics, powered by KUDZUKIAN Network.
Funky Politics executive producer Larry Robinson for KUDZUKIAN. Hosted by Daryl D.C. Catron and Marcus M.D. Ward. Guest bookings by Miko. Funky Politics recorded at KUDZUKIAN Studio. Directed, produced, recorded, and distributed by KUDZUKIAN.